Hello Winnie fans, the Souls-like genre has really taken on a life of its own, with many grimdark, Dark Souls-inspired titles across a range of genres. So here's a look at some of the best upcoming indie and not-so-indie titles. Of course, everyone knows about Elden Ring and Black Myth Wukong, with more indie entries like the Metroidvania The Last Faith and the action-adventure title Hunt the Night being similarly inspired, but with more entries that are more like Dark Souls in this video, with what looks to be brutal difficulty and precise, methodical combat. Let's begin with Perennial Order, a top-down Souls-like entry that has quite an interesting gimmick, since it is a boss rush focused entry and has bosses and enemies inspired by plants. It looks fantastic and is more like Elder Souls rather than a 3D entry, but it sure looks like a challenge.
The king has gone insane.
He is a proponent of a theory called animal magnetism.
He's capable of anything.
This automate is a masterpiece. It could do much more than dance.
Angel of Death, descended from the heavens to vanquish the clockwork tyrant.
Our first bigger game is the fantastic looking Steelrising, which basically posits the question, what if the French Revolution had automatons? King Louis has surrounded himself with an army of mechanical monsters ruthlessly clinging to power, so it is up to a marvelously made automaton to take the fight to him. From the gameplay trailer, you can see a variety of weapons and playstyles being shown off, where the art and animation simply looks fantastic. Do note that it does come to us from French developer Spiders, who has a track record of making interesting but flawed games like Greedfall and The Technomancer, so I do expect some jank with this, but who knows, it might end up in cult classic territory after all is said and done. I was kind of saving 2D Souls-like platformers for a video like this, but one that got my attention is Elderand, a pretty good looking pixel art entry with a heavy emphasis on the RPG and leveling systems. The grimdark fantasy world does look by the numbers, but is helped by the pixel art, which looks pretty good, and while some people might think that this is a tad too colourful to be a Souls-like, I think that the combat in particular fits the bill, with dodges and rolls looking to be something of interest. I'm pretty excited to share this new trailer for Bleak Faith Forsaken as well, a grimdark and very grey Souls-like RPG that does look to have fantastic action. Interestingly, this is an open world but self-contained entry where you're exploring an ever-changing building known as the Omni Structure, facing off against ghastly enemies and even giant bosses. Since we last talked about this, it appears that a release window has been proposed for Q2 next year, so let's see if it makes it to release.
In the age of the great forgetting, a spreading pixelation renders everything and everyone into decay. The land of Nostalgaia needs a high-fidelity hero.
Go away, hero!
A newly announced title that I already love is The Last Hero of Nostalgaia, being a satirical, comedic Souls-like title, which is a very clever twist on the genre, coming to us from the developer that made The Fall, where this trailer is so well done and even has a twist, so I'll leave you to them.
Peace, harmony, and fidelity to the people. For you are the last hero of Nostalgaia. And what even is that? Is this a joke? You're the most pixelated thing here! You can't save anyone!
When I last talked about Lies of P, it only had a cinematic trailer, but the developer did release gameplay and I have to say, I'm pretty impressed. In many ways, this does look to be very similar to Bloodborne, so much so that the developers actually had to come out and say that it was not intentional, but I say that it's completely fair to be inspired by a game that you love.
Wake up, son.
Most interestingly, the P in the title stands for Pinocchio, so it's a retelling of the story that sees our protagonist wanting to become human, only this time, he needs to slay a bunch of monstrous enemies. I think that the art looks very impressive, with more mechanical and puppet-like enemies instead of eldritch monsters, and does come to us from a rather large Korean studio, where I simply love the global nature of game development. Coincidentally, our next game also comes from a Korean developer in 21C Ducks, but I believe this is a much smaller company who are making the top-down entry Chrono Sword. You play as a time traveler, having to adventure in the past and present of a grimdark fantasy world, but no further details are available about the story at this point in time. I first came across this title on Twitter and then covered its Kickstarter campaign, successfully funded in December last year, with an initial plan released in November, which of course has passed, so I do hope that this is a 2022 release since I love the pixel art, but whenever this releases, it should be one to pick up. Let's kick off the top 3 with The Tarnishing of Juxtia, another 2D pixel art Souls-like entry that I think looks absolutely fantastic. The action, combat and look does remind me greatly of Death's Gambit, with attack animations that seem pretty lengthy, which should add to the combat. Of course, there is a bunch of Salt and Sanctuary, Blasphemous and Hollow Knight inspiration in this as well, where it does look to nail the 2D Souls-like genre based on this trailer alone. This has been quite a long time coming, but the developers are fairly active on Twitter, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this turns out well. A title originally slated for December this year is Thymesia, one where you play as a plague doctor mask-wearing character who uses plague weapons to eliminate their enemies. It is another very grimdark world, but the action and weapon variety looks great and looks pretty polished as compared to some of the other upcoming titles. Despite the delay, I'm actually pretty happy with this since games releasing in December don't usually get the coverage that they need due to the holidays, so it might be a blessing in disguise, where it comes to us from a Taiwanese studio as well, highlighting the global nature of game development once again.
Our sins will catch up with us. Always.
And of course, the long-awaited sequel to the best 2D Souls-like title, Salt and Sacrifice, is the game that I'm most excited about, announced back in summer, where the developers have been releasing gameplay footage in the months since then. although some people may be disappointed to learn that it is an Epic exclusive on PC. This game was announced 5 years after the release of the original, so it has been a while since we last visited this world, but is set in a new era and region, but in the same grimdark world. You play as a marked Inquisitor, a criminal marked for death, but are spared that fate in exchange for a lifetime sentence of hunting down powerful monsters known as mages. Interestingly, this adds an almost Monster Hunter-like aspect to the game, where bosses can flee when wounded, and even adds co-op support, so it's quite a change from the original. The art style has also been updated, having similar elements but looking so much better, so of course, it takes the #1 spot. For more Souls-like titles, watch these videos and I will see you after the jump.